Hello, everybody.
Good to see you.
Good to see everyone. We have episode 204. I want to welcome all the watchers. We have quite a few already popping in here, so welcome everyone. Again, this is episode 204 of Line Upon Line, and we're going to look at take another look at Daniel and a little different aspect on that. So to start us out, we have Dr. Ricks, of course, and we also have David tonight. But starting us out again with some jokes is Dr. Ricks.
Okay, this first joke is called Free Commandments. God went to the Egyptians and asked, "Would you like a commandment?" And they said, "What's a commandment?" God says, "Well, it's something like, thou shalt not commit adultery." The Egyptians thought about it and said, "Whoa, no way. That would ruin our weekend." So then God went to the Assyrians and said, "Well, would you like a commandment?" They said, "What's a commandment?" "Well, it's something like, thou shalt not steal." They said, "No way, that would ruin our economy." So God went to the Israelites and said, "Would you like a commandment?" And they said, "How much do they cost?" And God said, "They're free." They said, "Well, give us 10. Well, I see you're all still totally shocked at that one, right? I realize that could be considered bias, but we're above such matters, right? Okay, this one is called Government Actions. The government in action, our government in action. The General Services Committee, they're kind of an agency above the other agencies. They visited agencies, and we're going to streamline the day-to-day routine of these agencies and make them go smoother and more efficient. So one expert visited the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and suggested they get rid of all the clutter. They got paper all over the place. He suggested as a start, they throw out all correspondence over 10 years old. The FCC director loved the idea and replied, "Good thought, but first, we'll have to make 3 copies of everything."
Sounds like a bureaucrat.
Doesn't it sound like the federal government? We've had some bureaucratic problems this week. Anyway, this was called train service. Train service. A passenger, one of these commuter trains, is creeping along, painfully slow, really painfully slow. Finally, it comes to a complete halt. A passenger, kind of in a hurry, she sees the conductor walking down the sidewalk, sticks her head out the window. She says, "What's going on?" The conductor says, "Well, there's a cow on the track." 10 minutes later, the train resumes a slow pace. Within 5 minutes, it stops again. The woman sees the same conductor walking by again. She leans out the window. She yells, "What happened? Did we catch up with the cow?" And I'm going to steal one of Dave's jokes. In a karate class, what is the pig's best move? Pork chop. Dave, you want to tell the unemployed joke? I love it.
I got to remember it. I have a lot of jokes about unemployed people, but they just don't work.
They just don't work. Well, you can see our jokes are getting deeper and deeper. Instead of the 3rd grade, 2nd grade, they're getting deeper. Okay. Today we're going to discuss, have you ever thought about this? Why didn't Daniel and the lion den, why didn't Daniel just pray secretly in a windowless room? Since prayer is this one-to-one between a person and God, why did Daniel feel the need to keep doing the same thing. Very, at least somebody could observe it if they wanted to in his upper room. By the way, I'll say this so you'll get the context. The Jews, because of what Solomon said when the temple was first consecrated, he told them that if ever they were in trouble, they should pray toward Jerusalem and the place where the temple stands. So the Jews, and I believe some of them to this day still do it, when in the diaspora, when they're scattered around the world, they face Jerusalem and where they believe the temple is or was, and that's where they pray, because that's, figuratively speaking, where God sits. So Daniel was facing Jerusalem and praying from one of his open windows facing where Jerusalem was, in that direction. And that's what got him in trouble. So the question is, why didn't he secretly hide out for those 30 days?
Daniel at times was defiant. Maybe he was saying, I know that because he still could have backed away from that window and faced that direction. He probably was openly defiant, saying, I will not break or bend in my relationship with God. And so I could see him saying, I'm going to set the example, not necessarily for the people around him, but for us today, that at times we may have to become very defiant in order to have our relationship with God. God's going to take care of us, but we cannot turn our back on him and expect him to stand there with us. And so maybe that was maybe Daniel said something inside of him moved him to say, maybe, hundreds of years from now or thousands of years from now or whatever, just somebody will know that I did this.
Yeah, sometimes I think he chooses people that are a bit stubborn. You find that a lot. But once you've learned to curb your stubbornness towards God, and you know what I mean, as long as you're stubborn in a good way, I guess. But I think sometimes he does choose people that'll stand up and hold the line.
So you're saying that he chose my wife?
It's gonna be a long night.
I'm staying out of trouble.
Let's talk stubborn and obstinate.
You picked her, man.
The target of a legal conspiracy. It was a legal trap. And they had studied Daniel, and they could not find, if they could have got him on corruption, bribery, anything like that, or incompetence, they would have done that, because he was about to be made prime minister, in effect, over all of them. And some of them were so jealous they probably were green with envy. And so they decided that there's no way to get to Daniel except his religion. Let's put up slide 1, because I think investigating this more deeply might be helpful to us Christians in the future. Well, we'll see.
Daniel 6:4. Then the presidents and rulers sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no occasion or fault, because he was faithful. Neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.
Think of what a compliment that was to Daniel. Few people can say, we'll search his background in the last 20 years. We'll find something, some mud that'll stick or half stick, or accusations by some woman. You know what I'm saying, woman or something. They'll find something they can use against you. Daniel was so righteous. They knew they couldn't find any. And we know from the context of the story that of the 3 top presidents, he was so much, even this is the Second Empire, Persian Empire, as opposed to the Babylonian Empire, he was so much better advisor than anybody else. The emperor was going to make him, I'll call it, prime minister over the others. The other presidents and some of the lower ranking ones, they did not like that at all. So the only persecution they could give was Daniel, was based on his religion. I think the devil is a master at stirring up religious hatred, especially if you worship the true God.
The other part of this, I think, is a compliment. They couldn't find anything wrong in him, so they had to try to search for sin. Maybe he's not perfect in God's eyes because we can't get him on anything we're thinking of. So let's see if we can find something he's done that his God doesn't like. So now they're trying to, nobody, and that had to come from Satan, because Satan knows that none of us are perfect. But he set out imperfect people to try to find a guy who was pretty close to perfect or pretty good, to see if they could challenge him in his spiritual morality, because they couldn't find anything else on him. But that's a huge statement.
It is, isn't it? And it's almost as if, like you said, Daniel could have gone into an inner room or put a big heavy curtain over the window, still face Jerusalem, or however he worn it out, or some way where he could pray and they couldn't see. And if they broke into the house, he could stop praying. I mean, he could have, there was a way he could have done it, I think, without them being able to so easily see. They could have maybe speculated, but they couldn't have had any good evidence.
Right. He could have simply backed it, facing the same direction, got into a shadow and not been noticed. But that's not what he did. He boldly stood forth in his belief and love of God the Father.
And it was almost as if, I'll say someone inspired by Satan, these men knew. Like you make a legal trap, like they do in Washington all the time. And anyway, you make a legal trap where there'll be some disagreement among witnesses, and but in this legal trap, they knew Daniel was so righteous, they knew what he would do. Didn't you think? They knew what Daniel would do. It was almost like, the example is not exactly the same, but there's some parallel. It's possible. Remember the guy with the withered hand? He was in the synagogue and the Pharisees were there watching him, and Christ was there, obviously on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees were watching Christ and some of the others to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. It's possible to even work the details out so he'd be right there in front of Christ with his withered hand. In those days, without power tools and handicap things, it's a real, downer in his life. They knew Christ could heal him. Isn't that an interesting? You talk about recognizing the power of a prophet. They had no doubts Christ could heal him, was compassionate if he would heal him, and on the Sabbath, so they could accuse him of Sabbath breaking. It almost defies logic that they would think, wait a minute, when have we seen somebody heal a withered hand like that? But they knew Christ. They knew he could do it and probably would do it, and they're ready to accuse him of it. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
It's not. It's a depravity. It's got to be Satan is the author of confusion, or they had just depraved minds. If they would look out and say, this man is so good, so loving, so kind, and we know that he can heal this man, let's try to get him on something. I mean, that's what kind of a mind could that be?
Yeah, and they did, by the way, they did have rules against medical work and healing on the Sabbath. They had a whole bunch of rules. But it gets to be unbelievably picky. I think you couldn't kill a flea that's about to bite you until after it bit you. There's even stuff about your house is on fire. It's weird stuff. So they knew they could get Christ on this one. Total healing on the Sabbath. What could he say?
You throughout the Bible, there's always someone trying to set up someone of God, even from Christ to Daniel to others. They wanted to set him up to knock him down. The problem is you can't set up someone who is biblically attuned or who is a Christian, because you don't have to answer to them. You only have to answer to God. So you can't really set them up. I mean, what can you lose?
Well, you can't set on ball. So if they're truly with God, if you look at, I think it's Mark 7 or 11, or 13, 11, something like that, it says, think not beforehand when they come to arrest you of what you'll say. They can't get you because the Holy Spirit's going to answer for you. It's going to guide you in everything you do. So, and Satan knows this, yet he continues to try to find a way to. But if you're right with God, you don't even need to think about it. He's going to take care of you.
And by the same accord, if you are not right, you're more likely to trip up and fail and get, and have the setup actually affect you.
Let's go to the next slide, because we want to mention what Ken just said toward the end of this thing about being strong and weak, because I think it really fits in.
Daniel 6:9. Therefore, King Darius signed the writing and the ban, and when he had learned that the document was signed, Daniel went to his house, and his windows were open in his roof room toward Jerusalem, and he went to his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did before. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and confessing before his God. Then they came near and spoke before the king concerning the king's ban. Have you not signed a ban that every man who shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, except of you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered and said, The thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed.
And by the way, this is a legal trap. They actually lied to the emperor. If you look at verse 7, didn't put those slides. They said all the governors and administrators have approved this. There was some problem. Commentaries think about loyalty with a widespread Persian Empire. They think the king went along with it because he thought it was a way of everyone confessing loyalty, for unity, etc., to him. But obviously, all the wise men didn't sign on to it because obviously Daniel didn't do it. So they actually lied to the emperor. But once he signs it and makes it official, they're stuck with it.
Let's look at the other part of this too. Is the man's praying, he's harming no one, and they decide they want to have him eaten alive by lions. Again, what mind is behind that? The man is, it's like these people yelling they don't want us to have prayer in school because there is no God. Then who am I hurting? So there's a depravity that's behind that. And so they see this man praying and they decide we want him eaten alive by lions. They're certainly not righteous people.
Well, you see that in the world today. They're not just happy with leaving Christians alone today. If you don't want to bake a cake, that harms no one. They can find someone else to bake a cake, right? But no, we want to go after you. We want to harm you. We want to take your business away. We want to tarnish your name. We want to destroy you if you won't bake the cake or marry the couple or whatever they want out of you. If you won't do it, it's not just enough that they go somewhere else and do it or have it done. They want to destroy the person doing it. That's why some of these laws are made to begin with. All the same-sex marriage and all that is not designed to get marriage into the gay community. It's designed to go after the Christian community. That is, they want to get their foot in the door of the church and find a way to tear it down, and that's what it's about. Well, there was decades they had unions, civil unions or whatever, and it didn't bother anybody, but it didn't give them access to the church. Now that they've got this gay marriage, now they have access to the church and they can start working in that door and destroying that.
And there's no gay marriage because they're not monogamous anyway.
Right.
It's not the same thing.
At least the men aren't. From what I understand, at least the men aren't.
Oh, they've started marrying 3 people now. 2 women and a guy got married out in, I forget what state it was in, but it's happened, I think, more than one occasions where they all 3 share the DNA or something, and they all ended up married, and it's going to get worse.
Well, they could have 3 and a dog. I mean, I should be quiet. For our people. Well, I mean,
what was that movie? Chevy Chase, dogs and cats getting married. I mean, who knew he knew the future?
Oh, we better be quiet before we get in trouble. And here I think is if we go deep into the point, it's like Dave was saying. Daniel knew he was the target of a political scheme. political pressure. If he gave in to that, he'd be appeasing anti-God plotters. And Daniel was more concerned with how this would look to God than how it would look to the important people in the Persian Empire. And I think that's one way to view things. Sometimes you can give in to people and to cooperate with them, and your religion and their religion. I'm not saying you can never cooperate, but I think you have to say to yourself, how will this look to God?
It says, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Well, how did it look to the common man? They knew that Daniel was a wise man, and a lot of people probably looked to see what his opinions were and how did he act to set an example. There's I don't know where it is. I probably could find it, but Daniel was called to eat meat with Nebuchadnezzar, I believe, that had been offered to an idol or something, and he chose not to, and he went out and he ate fruit, vegetables, and water. He went out and ate with the common man. So Daniel was not a wise, rich, snooty man. He was balanced, and he knew that the common man probably looked to him and had every bit the value, if not more value, than the rich and wealthy and all those guys. So I think he was thinking about, how does this look to the people who look to me?
Well, that's true. And Daniel's hiding out his prayer life. All the other Jews will do the same. Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe others too.
One other thing real quick that it shows is, do you think if there was the slightest doubt in his mind that there was a God and who he was, that he would have risked his life for this? He had no doubt. He knew what he was doing. He had no doubt, and he was willing to bet his life on it.
Yeah.
No, he bet his life on it. He wasn't.
Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, he did. He put his life on the line.
All right, Daniel 6:14. Then the king, when he heard, no, I didn't read it. Then the king, when he heard the word, was very much displeased with himself, and he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored until sundown to deliver him.
He probably talked to some of his legal advisors, or whatever they call them, and looked for loopholes. He realized he'd been tricked or duped, or whatever they call it, stepped into a legal trap by the people who wanted to remove Daniel. Then one of them would get Daniel's position. You realize they're making a real mistake by messing with the emperor this way, but that's, I'm sure the devil inspired it. He knew he'd been tricked. He was loyal to Daniel. I think I have no doubt he knew Daniel was loyal to him. That this loyalty test, which bordered on idolatry, was unnecessary. And then, of course, let's go to the next slide.
All right, Daniel 6:23. Then the king was exceeding.
Before you read that, let me just make one statement. Most of you know the story, but I just want to throw it in here. All night long, the emperor stayed up thinking of ways to get him off. He didn't eat. He fasted. He was hoping that Daniel would survive the lion's den, which means even he was starting to believe in the God of Daniel. And then we go to this next slide. But for those who don't know where it fits in, you can see how it fit perfectly.
All right. Then the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of hurt was found on him because he trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they were thrown, they threw them into the lion's den, them, their sons, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they came to the bottom of the den. Then down in verse 25, then the king Darius wrote to all people, nations, and languages who dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all the domain of my kingdom there shall be trembling and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and endures forever, and his kingdom is that which shall not be destroyed, and his rules shall be to the end.
I can imagine when the other administrators heard what happened to these plotters and schemers, I bet they'd be scared spitless to plot and scheme against Daniel again. What do you think?
Only if they're smart.
And in case anybody thought, well, the lions just weren't hungry when Daniel was in there. When they put these guys in there, they didn't even, I guess they lower them on a rope or something. They didn't even get to the bottom before they were ripped apart. These lions were so hungry. Scary thought.
Yep.
Well, the lions very likely could see the Holy Spirit in Daniel. They made it visible to the lions, so they knew that, you know, they were afraid of him probably.
Yep. The angel protected him well, and also promoted the God of Israel. I think our challenge is to try to learn to see events and tests and trials from God's viewpoint, so we can decide between how it's going to look to man, how it's going to look to God. Sometimes you can be cooperative with other people regarding your religion, and it's all right. You're just being polite and cooperative. At other times, if you do what they want, it's like you're giving in and appeasing the forces of anti the true God, anti the Bible, anti religion, and it'd be better not to appease them. And I think we need to get the wisdom of trying to see it from God's point of view.
And I've seen it that when people give in, they hate you for giving in. You know, it's no win.
Yeah. That shows a sign of weakness in you if you give in. And you know, you can tell the difference if they're trying to jeer or goad you into something or get you to do it just to prove that you really don't mean it, you know, to do something. Oh, you really don't mean it. He'll do it. He'll go against his beliefs or whatever if it gets to this point or whatever that point may be. But if you give in, then they have their respect for you drops off, and that's the problem with most of them. They're trying to destroy others' respect in you when they're trying to get you to go against your beliefs like that, because they have no beliefs for the most part. So if they can get you to go against your beliefs and go against God, then they have so-called shown what you really are to others, and then everybody starts losing respect for you.
By the way, in case you ask yourself, atheists don't have any holy days, do they? They do have one. They do.
Earth Day.
April Fool's Day.
That too. They got Earth Day. They got May Day. They got April Fool's Day.
Yeah, that's true. They do have Earth Day, May Day, April Fool's Day. Yeah, if you don't believe in anything, you have April Fool's Day. If you worship nature, you have Earth Day and whatever that is. Put up the next slide. This is a different situation we're going to look at. And this one, the exiles had returned back to Jerusalem, and they had started building the second temple, and then they got challenged and through some lying and letters. The legal authorities told them to stop building the temple, and they had stopped for a number of years. And then God sent them some new prophets. Go ahead.
All right. Then the work of the house of God at Jerusalem ceased. So it ceased to the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Then the prophets Haggai and the prophet and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, rose up and began to build the house of God at Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them.
And many of those prophets, because they wrote small books, are called minor prophets. The point I think we can look at this one is they were under threat from their neighbors, which had included Arabs and Samaritans and others in that area. And they, in spite of the threat, said, as one of the prophets put it, we have our own houses with wood, and God's house, well, it's half built, just laying there unfinished, doesn't show we have real respect for God. And a little bit of preaching like that, and they realized that it looked bad, and they need to do the right thing and build the house for God. And they did, under threat. I mean, it all worked out, but they were under threat. And I just think it's interesting. They took the courage of seeing it from God's point of view. God was not going to bless the new state of Judah if they didn't build that temple. By the way, we might all say, this is part of the story. You read Ezra and Nehemiah. The second temple, at least foundation, compared to the first temple, Solomon's temple, was so bad, half the people were crying, who are old enough to remember, and half of them were cheering. Because it didn't look that great compared to the first one. But that second temple hosted them all. In a sense, that temple was greater than the first temple because of the man that was there made it holy. And we all predict the third temple is coming. It's if Daniel is correct, and we believe it is, of course, there has to be a temple for the false prophet and the beast to desecrate.
Yep.
So I believe it's coming. I would not be surprised. Now, I realize this is pure speculation, no evidence. I would not be surprised if this president, who's a builder, but he's more pro-Jewish than we've had in a while, and Netanyahu, they have some problems in the future, and they decide they want God's blessing, and they will rebuild the third temple.
We're looking at possibly 4 to 8 years, if that would be true, just sitting here speculating. But I can see within 4 to 8 years, something happened in the Middle East to force the hand so that temple starts getting built.
With this president, go ahead.
This president is a builder, and he's known for building opulent things. So I could see him bringing in historians and people who know what the temple originally looked like, David's temple, and trying to rebuild that temple to spec.
I remember hearing Trump tell the story of how he got started. I'll try to make this short if I can remember it correctly. His dad had a good rental business in Brooklyn, but it was, by New York money standards, it was small time. I'm not criticizing, but it wasn't big time. He decided after college to go to Manhattan, which was the big time real estate, and refurbish a hotel that was on the borderline between bad neighborhood and good neighborhood in Manhattan, but a couple blocks in the bad area. I think it was a Hilton, but I don't remember all the details. But he preserved its historical ballroom and all that stuff that goes in the, if you see some of those grand ballrooms and theaters, the artwork, and yet modernize and rebuild the building. And it turned out to be a big success. He made a lot of money, and that was the start of his building empire. And of course, he tells the story much better than I just did. But in other words, he respected the old while he was rebuilding the new. That's why I'm saying it's a possibility. Something bad will happen, and maybe both Israel and America will think we really need God's help. God will bless us if we build that temple. And that, of course, could be wrong thinking. It could be the beast power in Europe will encourage them to build it. That's a possibility too.
Yeah, it's something major happens where they think they need to build spirit in the people because things are so bad. Maybe they need to kind of build rebuild something to show maybe that the area or the world is coming back or something to maybe gain the people's, just bring them out of a bad situation. If there's, when we have all the wars and things that are to take place in the Middle East, it could, hey, we got to get people's moods back up. So let's do this.
Yeah, but also compare that with he's very pro-Israel. His daughter's converted to Judaism. His son-in-law is a Jewish man and a successful man. I think he respects Netanyahu and some of the Jewish people that he's dealt with over the years. But couple that with, we haven't had a president, one ever like that to this point with the Jewish people. But two, couple that with all of his rhetoric about God is going to protect us, God is going to save us, and quoting scripture and all the things. We haven't seen that.
Not since Reagan, and even not. I don't even think Reagan was as much as Trump is.
Not to this point, no.
Not every major speech I think he gives, he mentions God.
Interesting thing about when you look at Ezra and Nehemiah, there is some parallel to the Jews returning to the Middle East again. I mean, several parallels. One is when the Jews conquered in 67, 68, the old city of Jerusalem, they did not take the Temple Mount and build the temple. And Israel is somewhat a secular state. I realize it's complicated. They got a lot of political divisions and even religious divisions, but it's still more secular than it's religious. That probably was true even in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, and rebuilding the temple helped focus them to become a more truly godly state and not just be secular. And they were blessed thereby. You think the Jewish people might come to that same conclusion in the future?
I think that if there's a push from the people, the rabbis will head that way. If there's not, maybe the rabbis will start guiding them to be more that way, talking about their history and their lineage. But maybe a major event will make them say, what's left? We've got to turn back to God. And then they're going to look at their culture, their history, and their religion.
And part of why I say I've heard this from people who say they're experts. They say Judaism is divided into three, at least in Israel, three sharp divisions. I don't even understand why they're divided, but I'm sure you can find experts who could run down all the things this group doesn't accept and that one. And because Israel, and then the secular ones, I mean, they're Jewish in the sense that they probably keep atonement and the Passover Seder, but they're not all that religious beyond a few things like that, and they don't want to be. So Israel is really divided in that respect. They're going to have to get something to unify them first, because America's divided too. But I think you see what I mean? That's why I think something bad may have to happen to bring people back together again.
Yeah, they'd use it for a rallying point, I guess.
There are some very
and the temple could also add to that. Yeah. And I think, go ahead.
There are some very liberal Jewish sects too, that are caught up much more in liberalism, and there's others that are caught up a great deal in their history and their culture more than reading the Torah. So there's going to have to be some gathering. They needed to congeal under a common something.
Let's go to the next slide. I do think that we have to learn to try to see it from God's spiritual point of view.
All right. James 1:2. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into different kinds of temptations, knowing that the trying of your faith works patience. But let patience have its perfect work, so that you may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing.
And if you do fall in a trial and you know you're with God and God is with you, then we shouldn't have, I mean, it needs to be concerned, but we shouldn't have excessive doubt and fear, because God is with us. That would be the spiritual perspective. We may not know exactly what God wants out of us, but it makes sense, doesn't it? To see that point of view. And another point that occurred to me, guilt can make self-doubt. In other words, a lot of times we have a hard time forgiving ourselves. And I think that can also undermine our faith in God and seeing it from God's point of view. Let's throw up the next slide, because this is really a deep, First John is a deep, deep book. This is one of those deeper statements in First John.
1 John 3:20, that if our heart accuses us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows all things. Beloved, if our heart does not accuse us, we have confidence towards God.
And leave that up for a minute. If our heart accuses us, in other words, our heart may be telling us, you're guilty, you bum, and it doesn't want to forgive we don't want to forgive ourselves. God is greater. He has forgiven us. His grace is bigger and broader than we think it is. And we need to forgive ourselves, knowing that God has forgiven us. And having that belief that God's forgiven us, then I think we can see things from God's point of view more accurately.
We got to start looking at ourselves differently. Once God has forgiven you, you've been baptized, then you've got to start saying, I am not that guy anymore. Now you got to watch out, because that guy will chase you down. But you got to say, I am not that guy anymore. And you have to start identifying yourself. One of the things I tell people when they come into my martial arts schools, I'll put the kid in a monkey suit and act like a monkey. You put him in a martial arts uniform, he's going to try to do martial arts. When we put on the Holy Spirit, we need to start seeing ourselves maybe in a white robe. I don't know. I'm just, but seeing ourselves as cleansed and as part of a different family. I talk to people that go, it's so hard to overcome my problems because I grew up in a family where this was more common. And I understand that. But now you're being adopted into another family. This adoption process means you've got to take a new last name, and start becoming part of that family. And then you've got to look at yourself and say, who am I to become? What steps do I take now to become that way, to get rid of it? Otherwise, you're going to keep looking at yourself through the same dirty lens.
Right. And I would say stay with it. You can't overcome it. You can't overcome, this world and the flesh and all that. You can do it. So stay with it, and you can. It may take a while. It takes a while, I'm sure, for everybody, but you can get through it.
Don't beat yourself up too much.
No, not at all. That's not what I mean. I mean, just stay with it. Stay trying to change. Stay trying to improve and to try and be more Christ-like, which is what we're supposed to do. Don't give up when it looks like you can't do it. Just keep working at it. You'll get there.
What I tell people is look at the size of your windshield and compare that to the size of the rearview mirror. You got to check that to see what's coming up on you, but your goal and your focus has got to be where you're headed. And if you don't allow yourself to head off that road, you don't hit those yellow lines and those white lines, you're going to reach your destination. And you may have some traffic stops. You may have some slowdowns. But you got to check the rearview mirror every now and then, look up, see what's back there, because something may be sneaking up on you that you forgot about. But again, your goal, God's promise is the windshield. It's huge. And where you came from is the little thing up there that's nothing. And you got to keep your eye on look at the promise we're being given. Our brains cannot imagine what he's promised us. And with faith, you have to assume it's greater than what you can imagine. It's not a new house. It's a kingdom.
Yep. And Daniel had the faith to face lions, to face the furnace, to face multiple things, and he got through it.
Let's look at that last example. Which is our last set of slides here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They used to sing that in church years ago. Abednego.
All right, Daniel 3:15. Now, if you're ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, fall down and worship the image which I have made. But if you do not worship in that moment, you shall be thrown into the middle of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God who shall deliver you out of my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to return a word to you on this matter. If it is so that our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, then he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, let us be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the golden image which you have set up.
When you think about the emperor could have off with your head in a second. Wow, what courage. Isn't that amazing?
I get nervous when I say blue lights. So
boy, and they were out the last week, weren't they?
This week I've seen a ton of stuff.
Yeah, I see them everywhere
on some streets that you wouldn't expect to see them on. You know,
I saw it upside down.
They were everywhere.
Looking at little side streets that I'm on.
They were coming out of people's trunk this week. There were so many of
them. I was thinking about this one. Those three men could have maybe done a partial bow that they might reason as suitable to royalty, and maybe in a crowd wouldn't have been noticed. But no, as far as we can tell, they stood up straight as an arrow, and you see what they told the king. Like you were saying, David, that kind of courage God likes, and probably the devil won't pick on them again after the kind of courage they've shown.
Well, there's a scripture. It says something like, seek the Lord and Satan will flee from you. The other thing when we talked about, Christ talked about casting the demon out of the man, he says the demon, he'll go and look around, and if he finds barren land, he'll come back to the first guy with 7 more. But if you're so close to God, why waste your time? Go to somebody easy. So maybe after they try you, they're done with you. And then when, of course, you look at Paul, he was tried every possible, just every time he turned around, he had another trial. But again, he stood firm to the end, and he will be in God's kingdom. He had that sight.
Yes. One of the things that I want to just end with is, for the most part, all these men we've talked about were in good graces with the emperor and other high officials, which tells me, even though they stood for God, they were diplomatic, respectful to authority, tactful, because at least some of us have made mistakes where we were rude to people that we didn't have to be rude to, just to show them that we had our religious rights. I think that actually makes you more of, you're actually stronger if you can say no, but do it in a polite, respectful manner.
With a smile.
With a smile. You kind of undercut them. You kind of undercut what they want to say. You know what I mean? And I think that's what God would like, is to be that way. Let's see. Next week, I had it on my head here tonight. Next week, we want to look at a really bad king, Ahab and Jezebel. By the way, Jezebel is a bigger part of this than might appear the case. She's so bad that she's a model of something mentioned in the New Testament. So Ahab and Jezebel. But sometimes looking at bad examples may help us recognize danger when we see it.
I've worked for managers when I was young, and I learned not what to do from them, but I learned what not to do from them. I'm not going to be like this. I'm not going to be like that. So yeah, you're right in that. Absolutely.
Isn't it great if you can have a manager who can tell you no and make you feel good about it?
Absolutely.
What did he say? No. But he's a wonderful guy. I was thinking about world affairs. Well, not as much as I probably should be, but I was hearing someone on one of the, I believe it was a Christian show, but it might not have been. It might have been a regular political show. They were quoting something that happened in 1979 in a major rally in Poland back when they were part of the Communist Empire. And Poland, by the way, really suffered in World War II. They suffered from the Nazis, then they suffered from Stalin and the communists. but maybe in one sense they suffered more from the communists, or at least on a time basis. So they really suffered. And in the speech, the people rallied and they said, I believe our president quoted this. They had a big rally and they yelled, and it was Pope John Paul II, who is Polish, and they all rallied, "We want God. We want God." I thought that's interesting. I would have thought they'd say, "We want more food, we want democracy, we want freedom," or we don't want the communism anymore, or something like that. But they said, "We want God." And you realize the Pope was a factor in bringing down the communist empire. Within less than a decade, communism collapsed in Eastern Europe, and the rest, within 7 weeks, the whole empire was gone. Well, except in North Korea. I believe North Korea is the only country that is still communist as an economic and political system. Because even Cuba softened up some. I think that's true. But everybody else except North Korea is gone.
I've been wondering if North Korea really isn't just China, or Chinese state almost, where China's so controlling them, food and everything, and energy and everything else. And China's getting them to do these things, practice these missiles. They're using them as a pawn. I don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly could be.
I've heard that theory. They're like their pit bull on a leash, their bad boy to rattle the rest of the world. I do see one thing I'm looking at from China's point of view, not that I like it, but China would not want to see all of Korea be like South Korea, an American ally on their border. They would not want that.
Right.
Even right now, we still have that missile defense in South Korea. That gives us an early warning. If China, let's say if America and China got in an inter-ballistic missile exchange, we would have the advantage of warning from the South Korean sites. I mean, we'd have a earlier warning than they would have on us. That's what I'm saying. I don't think China likes that, having the American military on the Korean Peninsula. But frankly, China doesn't have anything to worry. America's not going to invade China. I mean, nobody thinks that. Did anybody think that?
I've never considered that. They've got 1 million man.
The only advantage we have maybe is in a missile exchange if we have early warning missile detectors on South Korea, but that's it. I mean, there's no other advantage. We're not going to invade China. But I don't think it matters. I think the Chinese don't want American military on the Asian Peninsula, period.
Yep. And you know what? And if you want a nice brief history on North Korea, the new 21st Century Watch is out. A lot of good articles in there. And there's a good one from Murray in here, and Mark and several others, even Dr. Ricks and Natalie. So this is out, and if you want to get they got free copies on the church website. If you just go to GarnerTedArmstrong.org and scroll down to 21st Century Watch and click right there, request a copy, and there you go. You get that, and I'll mail you a copy. But that's new. It just came out today. Yeah.
Good. We were actually discussing it at church, was it last week and weekend before, just that if MacArthur had been allowed to win the Korean War, that problem wouldn't exist. But there's so many ifs and ands. The question is, what would China have done? And we now know Stalin, of course, was pulling the strings and encouraging all that.
Well, if Patton would have been allowed to go to Moscow, none of this would be an issue. Patton wanted to go all the way to Moscow at the end of World War II. Yeah, he said we can take them. They're so beat up, we can take them.
Also, having the only one with the A-bomb was an advantage. And, there's a theory that Patton did not die in a car accident. You know that it was a combination Russian secret agents, but the Americans winked at it. They had him killed. I realize no one could prove that. But, that's just the kind of thing doesn't that make you a little suspicious? The reason
Probably.
the reason that could be true was Patton had a reputation of believing he was smarter than his commanders, which would include Eisenhower and one or two other administrators out there. He knew more better than they did, and sometimes strategically that was true. You know, the Germans considered Patton America's best general.
Well, if my
And
government tells me there's oxygen outside, I'm going to go check. So,
well, who do you think the Germans feared the most? Who do you think the World War II, who the Germans feared the most? I think it would be Patton, hands down.
Patton, yeah. We know that they thought he was they couldn't believe that he got relieved of command for slapping that guy, but regardless of his bad behavior, they felt that if he had everything he needed and wanted, he would try to get us into a shooting war with the Russians to force us to take him down, take communism down. Whether that's true or not, it's just a kind of conspiracy thing that makes you wonder, you know, can we control Patton? There were times when they actually slowed down his supplies because they didn't want him to go too far, too fast. And that doesn't even sound logical when you say it, but that's actually a historical fact. They wanted the British to take certain things because you want to keep the British happy. You know, they're a big part of everything. And that's the political side of it. Patton could care less about letting the British win. You know, that's how he was. He wanted to take it, and if he had the supplies and he had the audacity, I think that'd be the word he'd use, he'd take it.
And Patton did not have to be in the military. Patton came from wealthy people. I believe his wife's family was very wealthy. He did this because he had a calling. You know, had a calling to be General Patton and to lead. He came from very wealthy people, as I understand it, and his family was much more wealthy than his. He could have had a very nice career in life right here, but he had to be the general. He had to do what he did, and I think God used him, specifically that man, for these purposes, and he did a fine job.
And getting back to North Korea, MacArthur was, I'm not saying MacArthur was Patton, there are a lot of differences, but MacArthur was similar in many respects. And I think he felt he knew more than Truman did, and maybe that's being disrespectful. But regardless, I think they felt if they didn't fire MacArthur, he would have taken North Korea. And he wanted to bomb, you know, China backwards to a great extent, which probably was a mistake. I mean, it's probably a good thing. I don't know. It's hard to know the ifs and ands. Could they have kept China out and taken North Korea? But I guess that's one of those things you'll never know for sure. But if MacArthur could have taken North Korea, we wouldn't have that problem today.
Yep.
And the same thing if we'd gone into Russia.
Yeah, the whole communist empire thing problem wouldn't have occurred for all those years. But then again, you know, who is to say that it would have worked out, or we would have had a lot, like, just as a speculative thing, Natalie and I, both our dads were on battleships in the Pacific Ocean. And this is pure speculation. But if they had invaded Japan, you know, it's possible both our dads could have gotten killed. I mean, maybe it's unlikely, but it's possible. We now know the Japanese had hidden planes hidden in the hills of Japan for the invasion, and they would have been kamikaze-type pilots. Would love to have rammed into a battleship full of bombs and explosives.
My uncle's ship was sank. He was on a raft for the better part of a week with 4 or 5 other men, and just floated in the Pacific, sunburned during the day, and no food, no rations, until they floated up on some South Pacific little island, and the people there fed him, gave him water. He was down to 80-something pounds or something. These men were emaciated, and nobody else on that ship made it.
Wow. I mean, by the way, our 2 parents were on different battleships, but they're both in the Pacific Theater. You know, those ships bombarded the beaches before the Marines came. But anyway, you never know. So all I can say is it's probably a good thing not to rewrite history. You never know what might happen. If they invaded Japan instead of using the A-bomb, a lot of Americans could have been killed. And, you know, things could have altered history a lot.
What did they figure? How many people did they figure would die? They figured they had a number. They figured the people would die if they had to invade Japan. It was a huge number. I don't remember the number, but
it's
it was
actually
a lot.
Theoretically possible. More Americans could have died invading Japan than died for the entire World War II prior to that point. I mean, maybe not, but it's possible. One thing the Japanese are disciplined and determined. They supposedly were going to give rifles to 12, 13, 14-year-old boys to meet the Americans on the beach. I mean, obviously, it would have been worse for the Japanese. They lost a lot more people than we would have. But, you know, it's a lot of beaches. Japan has a lot of mountains. You could lose a lot of fighting could go on.
They're a very different people. I heard someone talking about what's going on in our inner cities in America and comparing that to the Japanese and how they don't have these issues, how the disciplined they are. After we had won World War II and we went into Japan to start the cleanup, our troops were riding down the road in trucks, and the Japanese didn't face us. And we thought, what defiant people that they won't even face us. And actually, in their culture, they said we aren't good enough to face you. And so they were actually being humble, but we didn't understand that. And they said, we're not good enough to look at you. We've lost so badly. And our men thought these are the most defiant, unbreakable people.
Also, after World War II, there were Nazi groups that still fought with the Americans after the war and the Russians and killed a bunch of people. They caused a bunch of trouble for about 2 years after the war. But in Japan, it was almost totally the opposite. The emperor told them to cooperate, and they did. There was very little trouble in Japan after the war. The Japanese cooperated. I mean, America was benevolent in victory too. You know, we weren't mean to them, but still, you know how they could have been guerrilla warfare, snipers, all kinds of things are possible. But Japan didn't have a lot of those problems. You have to admire their discipline, and that's why they could have been dangerous too. I never know about, but I really think the Korean dictator, he may be more scared than people think.
I don't know, maybe when you see him bumping off all of his relatives, so because he's afraid that I think he's afraid the Chinese will take him out of power and give it to one of his relatives. So he bumps off all of his relatives, so they got no one to give it to.
Yeah, I've heard he's murdered at least 2 uncles, a half brother, and some others. I mean, it's that's the mark of a paranoid man, don't you think?
Yep, absolutely.
And then Dennis Rodman goes over and hugs him.
Oh yeah, Dennis Rodman didn't solve any problems, though, did he?
No, look at Dennis Rodman. You gotta ask, man.
I mean, those two. It looks like Mutt and Jeff and the Crazy Boys.
How does he get through an airport security? How does he get through a metal detector?
Because he's too tall for the Koreans to reach up and put the poison in his face.
We're gonna get in trouble. I guess we better stop this. When we get in trouble. Well, at any rate, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the world in the next week or 2 or 3 or 4. As we look at some badniks next week, Ahab and Jezebel.
All right, then.
Hope all the Dennis Rodman fans aren't too offended out there.
I didn't know he had any.
I don't think anybody watching this program is on Dennis Rodman's list there. All right. With that, I believe we've come to an end of another program. So I'd like to say good night, everyone.
By the way, did Dennis Rodman marry himself? Is he the guy that married himself? Never mind.
Yeah, he did. He did marry himself.
I mean, if you want, that's what
No, he showed up in a gown and everything. He dressed like the bride and he married himself.
Okay. We're not going to mess with that one. We're going to slide right on out of here after that. All right. Good night, everyone. Have a great Sabbath. And we'll see you all back here again next week.
Good night, David.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.